Okay, we'll get started now. Thanks everyone for attending today's webinar on Is My Instrument Measuring Correctly? Today, this webinar will take you through factors that impact instrument performance and how to ensure your instrument is performing optimally. I'm Robert Grotans, and I am the Global Technical Marketing Manager here at X-Rite, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. A few quick things to go over before we get started. Because the number of people that are attending today's webinar, we will keep everyone muted. During the webinar, if you have questions, please use the questions function on the GoToWebinar panel. I will be monitoring the questions, and at the end of the webinar, we will have time to take a short Q&A. Finally, this webinar will be recorded, and you will receive a link so you can review the webinar at your convenience. With that, presenting today is Felix Schmalgruber, our Application Engineering and Technical Support Manager for the EMEA region. I will now turn it over to Felix to start things off.
Thank you, Robert. Good morning, America. Good afternoon, Europe, and good night, Asia. I'm always excited to have the world on these webinars. So is my instrument measuring correctly? What you will learn today. Is what makes your instrument accuracy so important? What causes a spectrophotometer to drift in performance? How to ensure my instrument's performing optimally? How do I professionally check the performance of my spectrophotometer? And how do I know when my instrument needs service or just an adjustment? And finally, why is all of this helping digital color management? So we've got a first question we've been interested in for you. We want to make this a little bit interactive. I think Robert can pull off our first poll, which is the question, are you using a spectrophotometer for quality control or color matching already? And I'm curious about your answers. So please, you should have a pop-up on your screen now, which allows you to make a selection and submit an answer to us. I'm gonna keep this open for a couple of seconds. Oh, what a response. We've got a 100% yes. That's exciting. So we really have professionals on the webinar. That's appreciated. So if I would have had no's, I needed to show you this one because color measurement is simply essential, as our brain is not always physically seeing things like they are in the truth. So some of you might have seen this checkerboard. And if you look at squares A and B, you might consider these to be two different grays because the square A is a dark gray and the square B appears to be a light gray. Nevertheless, it's physically one shade of gray because square A is in the lights and square B is in the shadows. So let me actually build that bridge for you to show you the evidence that square A and B are actually the same shade of gray. But as our brain is built for helping us see nice contrast and three-dimensional objects, we got the illusion that square A and B are two different gray shades of gray squares. Anyway, measuring these two squares with an instrument, of course, would actually tell us that it's physically the same color. So what does make the instrument accuracy so important? Well, it's the color tolerance food chain in a way, which consists of a customer requirement, which is maybe a color tolerance, which should ideally be larger than what your procedural variation is, versus what your material or raw product variation is, versus what your measurement variation is, and then finally what your instrument variation is. And that's of course the challenge we have as spectrophotometer manufacturer, to keep that instrument variation as small as possible to allow these other tolerances to be subsequently larger. The other problem, besides that food chain, which always beats the smallest, which is us, is the three-dimensionality of color. So if, as you all have instruments, you are familiar with the LAB system, I put a slide on to quickly recap that we have a three-dimensional color space in which we actually look at color values from black to white with a lightness value, and then from green to red with an A value, and blue to yellow with a B value. And every single color is a spot in that space. And we typically measure color distances or color differences as a distance in space, a so-called delta E, or the color difference value. Now, the problem with that three-dimensionality is, in case you use a delta E tolerance, that you as a specifier might specify a standard color and a tolerance space around it. That's a typical elliptical tolerance space we're using in our industry here. And then you have two suppliers delivering product in tolerance. Let's say supplier A delivers a product in tolerance with a delta E 2000 of 1.2, and supplier B delivers a product in tolerance with a delta E of 1.3, but they are diametral or away from each other. So the problem which you might have then as a specifier is that if you would compare product A against product B, and we do that by moving the tolerance space around product A as a reference, our supplier B will be out of tolerance here. And that's, of course, down to the three-dimensionality of color and down to the fact that a delta E is a radius and not a diameter. So what people usually try to do, if they're not familiar with best practices, they try to simply shrink the tolerance space to get things tighter, and that's mostly bringing them into a lot of conflicts on the color tolerance food chain, which you've seen before. So the big question is, what causes a spectrophotometer to drift in performance, if that's at all happening? And of course it is. We need to be honest about this. There is one very famous thing which says it could start with a fingerprint. Now, your white tile, which comes with every color measurement instrument, has a set of reference values, which and a white calibration is required because the light source you use in an instrument, it has also a specific spectral distribution or emission distribution, and we need to neutralize it to 100% level in order to allow a relative spectral measurement, which then converts into these LAB values. So if you have a white tile with reference values, and you perform a calibration, and you make a check measurement after the calibration, that white tile would ideally read exactly those reference values, because any minor variation of the instrument condition is compensated away with that calibration procedure, so that the white tile after a calibration reads very closely to those values which are referenced on it. Now, what if your white tile is actually contaminated or dirty, like with a fingerprint? Would it still read the same reference values, and would that still make good color readings? So that's the second poll question we want to ask you. Does that second method of calibrating your instrument with a dirty white tile still generate good readings? Give it a yes or no or a not sure, please. Wow. So I'm hopefully not boring you. We have a, let's wait a little more. Up until now, we had a pretty, so you've closed it already, Robert, right? Yeah, we have an 84% no, which is very straightforward, and we have a 16% not sure. The point is that that reading or a check reading after a calibration with a dirty white tile would still give you the same reference values, because a fingerprint is not as not a too far away contamination of your white reference that the instrument would not compensate for it. So in other words, the instrument compensates the fingerprint away so that you would still read the same LAB values after a calibration on that white tile, given the fingerprint would still be existing, right? Of course, if you calibrate with the fingerprint and then clean away the fingerprint, then you would see a difference, of course. But let's say the white tile has a scratch or a contamination, a permanent contamination. The instrument would pull itself back to those reference values regardless of that of what that white tile looks like. And that's a problem because you don't detect whether you have miscalibrated your instrument or not. So a dirty white tile will produce the same numbers but wrongly calibrates the instrument. Now, what to do against that? The very simple step which can be done with most instruments is to measure a check tile. X-Rite instruments are usually equipped, or industrial instruments, with a check tile. A check tile is typically or ideally a green tile because green is in the center of the spectrum and has a very distinct reflectance peak. So it's very sensitive to color changes. Now let's say after a clean white tile calibration, our check tile measures these LAB values. And let's say these are close or are the reference values for that check tile. If we calibrate our instrument to the second method with the contamination of the fingerprint, now our check tile would definitely see something different. Specifically here, it would see a lighter lightness because the instrument was compensating the fingerprint away by adjusting itself to read lighter than it should. And this also correlates then with the A and B values, which would go less chromatic typically. So only a colorful check tile would uncover a wrong calibration. Now, other challenges with instruments are, of course, of environmental nature. Humidity and temperature are always an issue. Dust and dirt in the air. Electricity variation is still an issue in some regions of the world. Lamp aging of the instrument itself, varying sample conditions is a general issue which needs to be controlled separately. Then, of course, shocks and vibrations might harm an instrument of optical nature because you have optical paths which need to stay consistent and stable. And of course, messy environments never help to sustain good readings, as these two contrasting pictures show. So how do I ensure that my instrument is performing optimally now? We would consider some things as daily maintenance. You should operate your instrument in a clean environment. You should definitely protect it from contamination. We have actually customers who wrap their instruments partly or fully into foil sometimes to protect it from contamination. What you see on the image here is a Color Eye 7800, our benchtop sphere instrument. We do have a vertical stand for that instrument so that no product or material could actually drop into that sphere, into the aperture of that instrument. Of course, as we learned just a minute ago, you should keep your calibration media, the white tile and the black trap, and that green check tile clean and stable. And of course, you should perform that check tile reading after each calibration, which is an automatic function you can enable in our software. And of course, we recommend you to get preventative maintenance for your instrument on a regular basis. Now, for some of you, this might already be common sense. For some of you, it might not. There is one more way on how to professionally check the performance of your spectrophotometer. Which is a solution only X-Rite offers, which is called Net Profiler. Net Profiler is a professional tool to control a single instrument's performance for compensating for user or environmentally caused drift. The Net Profiler helps to get multiple instruments across different production sites back into the factory specifications. And that essentially improves the inter-instrument agreement between different instruments or instruments of the same kind, and it enables digital color management. And that's very important for us. And I decided for this webinar to put the Net Profiler process into a visualization because some people don't know how it works. So what you do is Net Profiler is a web-based system. So you log on with your organization alias and user credentials to our Net Profiler server with the Net Profiler client. which also connects your instrument to that server. Then you measure a set of BCRA ceramic tiles, which are similar tiles our service technicians use to calibrate your instrument or recertify your instrument when you get it in for service. The tiles are actually manufactured and certified or equipped with reference values on the same equipment we use to produce and calibrate our instruments. So they're fully temperature controlled. Then these readings are, of course, taken under taking the temperature at the environment you are performing these measurements into consideration, because ceramic tiles are thermochromatic. They change their color behavior with temperature changes, but it's a linear effect which you can nicely compensate for. So once the readings are compared to the references stored on the server, a profile might be generated, and that profile might be downloaded to the instrument to compensate for minor variations. Now, once you have loaded that profile onto the instrument, you make a verification measurement on your tiles, again considering your current temperature, and if you see an improvement there, or if the server determines an improvement, you receive a certificate, which is more or less as good as a calibration certificate, with the benefit of telling you how well your instrument performs in your environment. And we'll see in a couple of minutes what environment means in that context. Finally, if you're working in a larger supply chain, or if you're a multi-site workflow company having instrument parks across the globe or across different production sites, NetProfiler comes with the benefit of this being server-based. You actually can review all your instruments and their performance on that server and run reports to know exactly whether all your instruments performing as they should. Now, the question always comes then, well, how do I determine when my instrument needs a service or just an adjustment or just that profile? That's rather simple. And that's actually helping you partly to extend your recertification intervals, and was one of the original requirements from our customers, which made us invent NetProfiler. The point is, if you verify your profile and you receive a certificate, the world's good, right? Even if your last service was maybe already more than a year ago, which is our recommended service cadence. But if your results on the NetProfiler verification run bad, then of course you know your instrument does not perform properly any longer, and then of course you should first diagnose. You should diagnose whether your instrument is in a clean and stable condition, whether your white tile and black trap is in a clean and stable condition, whether all these tiles of the NetProfiler tile set are in a good condition, whether you had any environmental changes of massive nature, like 10-degree Fahrenheit or 7-8 degrees Celsius temperature shift or something like that, which happens occasionally. We have customers operating their instruments in unideal conditions, like close to a window where the sun could hit the instrument for certain hours of the day and then could heat up the entire instrument to actually introduce color measurement drifts of unexpected nature. So we do have these things. Once you, as long as you can diagnose these and then retry, you could of course in the next retry pass the verification again and get your certificate. But if you cannot pass it any longer, then of course it's a good moment to think about sending the instrument to service or have a service technician show up at your site. So that's what NetProfiler helps with. That was the original market requirement, that customers said, we are happy to have a certificate valid for a year, but we are in doubt whether our instrument performs stable within that year or not. And NetProfiler is simply a professional instrument performance checking and performance compensation tool, because that profiling ability, or this opportunity to apply a certain profile to the instrument, was just an add-on on the original market requirement, which we nowadays use very massively with multiple customers of larger nature, or even small customers, for digital color management. So digital color management for us means whether or not people are sending samples or references around supply chains or around the globe. So that would lead me into our last poll for today. Are you sending references and samples around your supply chain? Yes or no, or not sure? I'm very curious about the answer here. Okay, that's very interesting. We have 61% of you saying you still send samples around your supply chains or between customer and supply relationships. 30% say we don't do that any longer, or we don't do that at all, and 9% say we're not sure. Thank you for these answers. That's was kind of expected in a way. So that leads us to the question, to net profile or not to net profile. That's the question, right? So that leads me back to the environment instruments are used in. Our competitors say our instruments are accurate enough, we don't need net profiler, or we don't need a tool like that. But they still also face an issue which I want to highlight here. So let's say you are a specifier in the USA and you have an instrument in your laboratory, and the laboratory is at perfect air conditions, which is 22 degrees Celsius or 72 Fahrenheit and 50% relative humidity. And let's assume we have a reference sample, which is the most simple LAB set of values you could imagine, which is reads L50A0B0. So it's a mid-gray exactly in the center of the LAB space. Now, let's assume you have a Far East supplier or manufacturer working with you using the similar instrument, and that instrument is used in a production facility in Taiwan. And in that facility, or at the area where it's used, you have 31 degrees Celsius or 88 Fahrenheit, and you have 85% relative humidity. So that's, of course, a massive impact in terms of environmental differences between these two instruments. Now, you take an aircraft, you fly your reference over, 61% of you do that, to Taiwan to have actually that Taiwanese person measure the same thing, because you know that he might read slightly off, which is what we do here. So here we have an instrument to instrument difference, not necessarily caused by the instrument itself, but by the fact that we have different environments here of minus 0.4 in lightness, minus 0.4 in A, and let's say plus 0.3 in delta B. And depending on what kind of tolerances you want to achieve or maintain, that might be a big issue for you already. So the point is, Net Profiler helps you to compensate for these environmental differences so that you would actually get closer readings between two net profiled instruments, regardless of the environment. And that for us is the door opener for digital color management. It removes sending samples away across the globe. It typically shortens your time to market because you can communicate color values instead of sending samples. And it also helps a massive problem which we see with many of our customers whenever there is more than just one sample to be sent, which we call the error stack. Some customers actually decide on a master physical standard in their material specification, and then they do secondary standards to be spread across their supply chains. And it might occur because of the three-dimensionality of color, which I mentioned earlier, that the one shipped physical standard deviates in one direction at a 0.4 delta E to the master physical standard, and the other one deviates at 0.6 delta E into the opposite direction to the master physical standard. So then two suppliers actually make their material match, in this instance an ink match, which again deviates from the shipped physical standard which they refer to, and then their package actually deviates again from that ink match So we might pile up a total variation of 6.2 delta E, so that if two of these packages, crisp packages, would show up in the same shelf, you would really have a visual difference. And here we say, with digital color communication, which for us in X-Rite consists of a number of different components, one of which being Net Profiler NP here on the instrument condition, which we highlighted in this webinar. You can avoid this error stacking, or you could at least reduce it, because a reduced error stack would actually work, have every supplier work from the same digital master standard, and then reduce therefore the overall total variation. Now, I hope this was meaningful and beneficial for you. I just want to highlight the three software packages which play with Net Profiler here in our industrial color management world, which is a color matching software called Color iMatch, quality control software Color IQC, both supporting the Net Profiler instrument performance control software. If you want to learn more about these products or X-Rite solutions, or the way our tech team could help you with getting your color problems under control, don't hesitate to visit us at xrite.com or call us at +1 800 248 9748, or find us also in the social media at the given links. We'll distribute these this recording so that you can look up these contacts again. Now, this is it from my side. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I'm open for your questions now.
Yeah, it looks like we already have a few questions coming in. If anyone else has questions, feel free to submit them through the GoToWebinar control panel. So the first question is, are the check tiles available for some of the print and packaging units, such as an Exact?
An Exact does not come with a check tile, because the Exact has the white tile integrated in the instrument, also as a dust protection for the aperture. For the Exact, we highly recommend to start off with Net Profiler right away, because the Net Profiler does have, in case of an Exact, you don't get ceramic tiles, but a card made of painted chips from our Mansell color laboratory. And these color references are long-term stable, temperature controlled, and also contain a white tile, a green color for exactly that check. You could, of course, purchase a Mansell card as a check reference in picture postcard format or US letter format at around $30 each. And we could provide you with the recommended green shade for a specific Mansell color, as the Mansell laboratories are a part of our business.
Okay, and next question, is Net Profiler site licensed or networked?
The Net Profiler is actually instrument licensed, and it's an annual license fee, such as a preventative maintenance contract or a service contract. We are currently looking into combining physical service or repair contract offerings with the Net Profiler. So it's an annual license fee valid for the instrument. If you, of course, have multiple instruments, the server access is free of charge to monitor the overall performance of your instruments.
Is Net Profiler compatible with the i1IO / the i1 Pro 2?
No, no. The i1 product is for digital color management or ICC color management in desktop publishing applications originally, and large format printing. Yeah, I cannot. There will be future generations where we consider Net Profiler as an option. In the current i1 product, it's not an option. Nevertheless, our i1 Pro 2, so second generation instrument, does have an internal performance check mechanism with a specific green emitting laser diode, which actually centralizes the spectral analyzer and makes sure that the instrument performs consistently. But NetProfiler is not available for the i1s yet.
Kind of along the same lines, does NetProfiler work with ColorCert?
NetProfiler does work with ColorCert in combination with exact instruments.
Okay.
Or IntelliTrax scanning instruments, because our IntelliTrax 2 is also NetProfiler ready.
Okay. One person is looking for clarification. The profile that is generated is downloaded internally to the individual device. Is that correct?
In most cases, for our older devices where the firmware, which is the software on board of the instrument, was not ready for holding a NetProfiler profile because it's a legacy device of ours, we manage the profiling in combination with the QC, quality control, or color matching software. But for all current instruments in our portfolio, we do offer NetProfiler on board of the instrument.
Okay. So it doesn't need to be connected to software, is that correct?
No. It's specifically relevant for handheld instruments which you want to use in a production floor, disconnected from a computer, of course. For the profiling as such, it needs to be connected to the NetProfiler software, of course.
Yeah. Along the same lines, then, so the exact unit also holds the NetProfiler profile.
Absolutely, yes. Yes. And you also see the status and the status of when the last profile was run, and how long the profile is still valid and when it will expire, because we typically recommend a profile to be valid for 30 days with going from green to amber state after 30 days up until 45 days when we turn it into red, and after 60 days we hard expire it and push the user to actually reprofile the instrument. I mean, that was the whole story about the profiling as such, that customers said, well, it's nice if we send you the instrument for factory repair or certification, but on the way back to us, it could already undergo massive shocks and vibrations on a truck and could lose its performance already. So we want to have a means of checking the performance of our instruments at the place where we use it, and that's what NetProfiler does.
Okay. Is there anything to add with regards to networking of NetProfiler?
Well, the networking of NetProfiler simply requires a port 8080 open internet, standard internet connection, at least at the first time of use, to download and sync the references from the server. The latest version, NetProfiler 3, the latest major version of NetProfiler, which is out in the market as well already since 2015, I'd say, allows the user to also use NetProfiler on an internet disconnected computer if the connection to the server was once made on an internet connected computer. The point is the tile sets or the NetProfiler delivery today consists of a USB flash disk, which holds the software installer and also holds the software as an executable, so that you can plug it into a computer, run the software from the flash disk on an internet connected computer, log into the NetProfiler server with your credentials, get all the reference data down, and then take that USB flash disk into your production floor, plug it into the production computer, which is maybe not internet connected, and run the profiling on that production computer without being connected to the internet. That's a newer feature of NetProfiler, because we did have customers who said we don't want to bring our production computers onto the internet. We see this to become less and less of a problem, because typically everyone carries a internet connected device in the pocket today, which is the smartphone. And we see more and more devices connect to the internet also in this Internet of Things trend, and we consider NetProfiler to support this in a way.
Okay, we have a few more questions. One person just wants you to talk a little bit more about the two other software packages being Color iMatch and Color IQC.
Is there anything specific around these, or let me just jump back?
Which one of those, I guess it's a two-part question here. Would one of those be better for matching molded plastic to painted steel?
Yeah, Color iMatch is especially our software for color formulation of industrial materials. So it has two different math engines, one which we call the engine for paints and plastics, and the other one which is the engine for textiles, as textiles behave slightly differently due to the fact that textiles are mostly colored with dye stuff, and paints and plastics are mostly colored with pigments. The benefit of our Color iMatch paints and plastics math model and math engine is that it's a non-linear engine, which can not only formulate opaque colors or colors with full hiding power, but also translucent and transparent colors, which can, if correctly set up, help dramatically to reduce pigment consumption and shrink or lower your colorant loads by still maintaining opacity, which is typically a requirement for many industrial materials. So Color iMatch is more for paints and plastics and textiles. We do have a additional color matching software, which is called ink formulation software, which is more a tailored solution for the printing industry, specifically the color formulation of spot colors for printing. Color IQC, though, is the little brother of Color iMatch, and Color iMatch in most levels consists a Color IQC license. So for us, it's actually one software platform which interacts with each other. So we have always the QC part embedded into our color matching software. And then, of course, NetProfiler is a separate client software, as you can see from the interface on that screenshot to the right. But there is an interaction between Color IQC, Color iMatch, and NetProfiler, because we track the condition of the instrument, whether or not it is net profiled, with every single measurement in our Color IQC software, which you can see by the little badges here in the Data Explorer view on IQC here on the center screen. Hope this answers the question more or less.
Okay, that was actually the last question we have, it looks like. So that marks the end of our webinar. You will receive an email with a link to the recording of this webinar so that you can review the materials at your convenience. I'd like to thank everyone for joining today and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.